The ability to step into the cinema and have that not there. There are not many places where actually actively you're encouraged to put your phone away and spend time just doing one thing and being able to be taken away and immersed. Everyone can remember their first visit to the cinema, the first film they watched.
What was yours?
Ghostbusters.
Very cool. Very cool. Mine was Titanic, not quite as cool, but I guess iconic in its own way.
There's growing research from it as well, but those who like content. If you watch something on whatever streaming service you're watching on, you watch a film there, you will love it in the cinema too.
Susie Welch, thank you so much for coming on The Business today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
We're going to explore a bit more about the kind of cinema landscape in just a moment. But before we do all of that, let's kind of go back a bit. So in your role, you oversee more than 800 screens across the UK and Ireland. Tell me a bit about your relationship with kind of movies. Are films a big passion for you? Is this the dream job?
Definitely is the dream job. And films, I suppose I've had a mixed relationship with films from leaving school, having done theatre studies at A-level and that being a big part, into kind of stepping into hospitality, which kind of has some of that entertainment piece. And then coming into Odeon 7 years ago has been kind of a nice balance of bringing lots of stuff all together, actually. And
I want to hear a bit more about your background in hospitality, but how many films do you watch a month? Do you have to see all of the big name films?
Can't possibly see everything that's there, but as many as I can, and that can vary depending on what's going on. But yeah, I was in the cinema twice last week, so but then not at all this week.
As you said, you started your career in hospitality. Tell us a bit about what that looks like. Where was your first job?
So my first job was in a bar making coffees. Not known as a barista then, but known as a barista now. And then I stayed working in bars, making cocktails through university, and then stepped into restaurant management, and then into HR and training, essentially, within Whitbread, and then kind of worked my way through lots of different roles within HR, to HR director, and then out and into the role that I took in Odeon. So I worked for Costa and Pizza Express in that time as well.
And so let's talk a bit then about kind of the HR discipline, because as I alluded to just now, I think it perhaps is becoming more commonplace. And obviously you've got the example of Lena Nair, who's now the chief executive of Chanel, but she also came through the kind of HR and chief people officer route. What do you think that says potentially about how leadership is changing today? Do you think big companies are valuing the skills that you bring to the table as somebody who has worked in HR?
So there's definitely been a bit more of a shift. And I think particularly over the pandemic, there was a shift about the role that chief people officers played around potentially the board table, but also just getting businesses through that time. But then also the kind of evolution of leadership. It is kind of, when you've spent time, I suppose, in the theory of it to a degree, actually how you kind of build that out and then work through it lends itself well, particularly in businesses where, you know, high volumes of people. I think it's a great attribute to have.
And obviously you stepped into the role at what was quite a tricky time, right, for cinemas. So I'm right in thinking it was 2023?
Yes.
So as we all know, the UK kind of box office has recovered somewhat since COVID. So I think it hit 990 million last year, but that's still about 20% down on pre-pandemic levels. How do you kind of think about numbers like that? Is that the sort of thing that keeps you up at night?
I think it's all about focusing in on what we've got and maximising what we've got. So we have a film slate coming in. The film slate for 2026 is amazing. There is an amazing breadth of films, and then continuing to build back, continuing to kind of showcase why people should come to the cinema, what's great about it, the experience kind of we deliver. So yes, you want to keep growing. Yes, it's been challenging, but there's loads of opportunity with that as well. And for me, it's probably more on how do we maximise that opportunity.
Consumption habits have changed, haven't they? So I think it's 88% of UK consumers now have at least one streaming subscription. Most have more, spending around £50 a month on average. I know the bill in my house is certainly higher than that. What impact has all of that had on cinema habits?
I think there's two kind of elements to it. There's growing research from it as well, but those who like content. If you watch something on whatever streaming service you're watching on, you watch a film there, you will love it in the cinema too. And we see those that consume a lot of content will go to the cinema just as much as well. But we're also, I think, starting to see those that spend more time on their phones or screens or a slightly different piece. Actually, the ability to step into the cinema and have that not there. There are not many places where actually actively you're encouraged to put your phone away and spend time just doing one thing and being able to be taken away and immersed in whatever world you've chosen to be immersed in on that occasion.
And that's so true. It's like an enforced digital detox, isn't it? And we all know there's that kind of double screenings when you're at home watching something on TV. Often I don't pay quite enough attention because I'm also doing something on my phone. And it's not just streaming services that you're competing with for a share of wallet. It's also live experiences, right? And this explosion around every time Taylor Swift tickets go on sale. My goodness, I've never managed to get one, but if I did, my daughter would be delighted. And we saw the kind of Oasis phenomenon last summer as well. Is there a sense that within the kind of family budget that you're competing with more, kind of experiences across the board?
Yeah, I think there always will be. It will grow. I think for us, hopefully we're seeing more as the more regular experience you can have, for the price of a ticket that you can get with cinema. It's, it is a lot cheaper than those experiences. So yes, you're competing. I think we compete for time as well. But for us, it's that day-to-day opportunity or week by week, whatever it may be, to give somebody that experience.
And presumably there's also ways of collaborating with those kind of tours, isn't it? Is it the Eras tour where that was kind of screened in cinemas? So for people who couldn't make it along to the show, they could go and have a different type of experience, admittedly, but in a cinema rather than a stadium.
Yes. And a very different piece, because actually on both of the pieces that have been done with Taylor Swift, actively asking the fans to stand up to sing. And I can remember being in one of the cinemas on one of the opening nights, and it was just, it wasn't silent. It was people were up and a very different feel. So it shows that you can kind of balance out some of those pieces in a really different way.
And you mentioned just now about kind of value for money, right? And that the cinema still has a perceived value for money, particularly when you're, comparing it with ticket prices, which, as we all know, can be extortionate. However, ticket prices have risen about 70% in the last 20 years across the board. How much pressure are you under to absorb kind of cost increases versus increasing ticket prices?
I think that for us, it's all about how we ensure we're giving guests choice and managing those pieces. We will work hard to ensure that we're not passing things on directly. But for us, giving people choice, that you talked about subscription, Limitless for us is a great opportunity to give value for money, to give people the opportunity to pay a monthly subscription fee and see as many films as they want to in that month. But also we have Member Mondays, we have a whole host of different ways that you can come to an Odeon and see the film that you want to.
And how closely do you track the competition when it comes to ticket prices? Because obviously you've got the likes of Vue, you've got Cineworld, and some of those will be more expensive, some of them will be less so. Is it something that you keep a close eye on, or do you just make sure that you're delivering a different kind of experience, a different kind of value?
So for us, I think it's making sure that what we do well, and we do it in the right way for that particular cinema in that particular environment and community. So we have kind of our Lux offering, which is recliner seats, more premium, and then we have probably our more standard cinemas as well. So ensuring that we are priced well for the community and the environment we're in is the important element for us, and the experience is there.
I had a conversation with somebody who's one of your members earlier this week. He said he pays £19.99, I think it is, a month. But he goes and sees 2 films a week. And he said it feels like he's effectively stealing from the company because he goes to see so many films. Because, of course, once he's seen 2, it's basically paid for itself. So what's the thinking behind that? Have you thought about increasing prices in light of all the additional cost pressures you're facing?
For us, that kind of subscription model is we want to make sure that it provides good value. And for those that want to come to cinema on a regular basis, it is a great way of doing that and feeling like you're getting good value. We will always kind of review and see where we are and see what that looks like within the market. But it is about providing limitless films.
And just the last point on kind of price and cost. How much have you seen your costs increase by? Because we, across the board in hospitality, I'm speaking to hospitality business owners and leaders all the time, whether it's energy costs, staff costs, etc. How much of an impact has that had on your business?
It's had an impact, without a doubt. But for us, it's been about how we work through that and how we look at our business in a different way and where we can make changes to how we operate to mitigate as many of those costs. So yeah, without a doubt, increased cost. But we work hard to ensure that we can kind of manage those in the best way possible.
And so you mentioned before the slates for 2026 and how you're excited about all the films you've got coming up. There's been a real kind of period of tension between the studios and cinemas over release windows, right? So the gap that is between the film being shown at the cinema and being released on a streaming platform. Where does that relationship stand today? Because if I think as a consumer, again, all the films in my head at the moment are kids' films. But Wicked 2, we were going to go to cinema and see Wicked 2. And by the time I'd got my act together, it was already available on the TV. And in fact, we just got some popcorn and watched it at home. So how do you think about that tension now? Do you think we've found a middle ground?
I think it's work in progress, will always be work in progress. But there is definitely a better kind of conversation, more understanding, and kind of a minimum 45-day window kind of has been talked about much more.
And would you like to see that come into force? Do you think a 45-day window would go far enough?
I think there's always opportunity to keep moving and give that kind of cinematic experience opportunity to be for people to see it in the cinema.
And what about the kind of consolidation we've seen in Hollywood with the recent Paramount Warner Brothers Discovery merger is, of course, the latest example. So the consolidation we see with the big studios in Hollywood, does that have an impact on the number or the quality of the films that you see come through?
I think it's hard to kind of work through without, we need to see it in action or understanding. But for us, I think as long as we've got good quality content coming through, wherever it comes through from, and throughout the year, then that's the most important piece for us.
And so David Ellison, who's the CEO of Paramount, has said that he wants to increase the number of releases. And I think he said he put the number at about 30. Do you think that will actually happen? And is that actually the answer even? So is it about more releases or is it about better releases that are going to bring punters into the cinema?
I think it's probably a bit of both within that. You want to have really good quality content and it to be more of it. The breadth of the slate, ensuring that we've got content for everyone, for the most diverse group of people possible, is great for us. So as much content for our guests as possible.
And so let's think then about what does work and what has worked in the last few years. Because if we think about what succeeded, so I think 2 of the biggest grossing films last year were the Bridget Jones sequel and even Minecraft. So what does that kind of tell you about where the future of cinema is going and what performs well these days?
I think those pieces that people can connect to. So both of those, one of those was a family film, but actually not a family film. There were as many teenagers in Minecraft and adults in Minecraft who'd been gaming, and it and it brings a memory back to them, whether they've gamed when they were younger or whatever it may be, into a Bridget Jones, which is, you know, for every female out there kind of who'd maybe been through the whole piece. We had Galentine's nights. There were spaces for, you know, for friends to come together to watch that film.
And so do you think nostalgia, it sounds like, is underpinning a lot of that? So both what you said about Minecraft, kind of bringing people back in because it reminds them of something that they played in their youth. And the same with Bridget Jones, right? I think I was at university when the first film came out, and I've watched them all at the cinema. But part of that is about recapturing that moment, right? And sharing it with friends. So yeah, how much does nostalgia play a part in the success of a film?
I think in some films, absolutely. I think everyone can remember their first visit to the cinema, the first film they watched.
What was yours?
Ghostbusters.
Very cool. Very cool. Mine was Titanic. Not quite as cool, but I guess iconic in its own way.
So you have those moments that you kind of hold back, and everything that sits alongside that, and ultimately the kind of joy that goes with that as well. So there is a nostalgia piece, but there is also then that element of those films that are brand new, that give you something different. You know, if you sit there with a Project Hail Mary that has just been out, or, you know, Hamnet. So they're not always those franchises. There's those that kind of are very different and bring you into a different space. So.
Is there still that sense that some films are cinema films? My husband will talk about this as a concept. There's like a film, you know, One Battle After Another, I think, is one of those types films that you have to see in the cinema.
Yes.
Is that right? That you have these kind of big, kind of extravagant films with massive budgets that you have to see at the cinema?
I think I would sit there and go, every film has the opportunity to be seen in the cinema, or should have the opportunity to be seen in the cinema. But there are films that definitely give you an added experience having watched it in the cinema, or, you know, in a premium format in an IMAX or whatever it may be. So, you know, seeing some of those pieces makes them very different.
And thinking about some of the franchises that we were talking about just before, how are you leaning into ways of, I guess, kind of improving and adding to that experience? So I'm thinking about things like merch.
Yes.
My kids love merch. They have the Zootropolis 2 like little cups with a squirrel on the top. Absolutely love that. This film buff I was speaking to this week was telling me that he's still got kind of Harry Potter glasses and wands from when he was a kid at the cinema. So what role does all of that play, both in terms of, you know, keeping customers happy and adding to that experience, but also crucially, kind of on the bottom line, surely it's also ways of selling stuff to people?
Yeah, it is all part of it. And we have our red bag coming out today, our red popcorn bag for Devil Wears Prada that will be out today. So that is one of those pieces of putting those elements at the center. And we've seen merchandise kind of build up, connect people into the film as well. I think we've had kind of viral moments from a social perspective where we've introduced a piece of merchandise that collectors have wanted. They want to kind of have the Yoshi popcorn bucket. So it has been a big part and a growing part of building out that visit to the cinema for film goers, and something that, you know, is become much more a regular part of our business.
And that's interesting what you say there about then it appearing on kind of social media, because that in effect kind of does the marketing for you, right? If people are posting something on TikTok and it goes viral, that can only be a good thing.
Agree.
And obviously a big bone of contention about going to the cinema is how much money you're going to spend on the pick and mix, right? So you go to the cinema and you'll, the other day, I think my daughter managed to spend £16. It actually wasn't at an Odeon, it was at a rival cinema, forgive me. But yeah, people get quite upset about the amount of money it costs to buy food and drink at cinemas. And then they'll do things like sneak their own food and drink in, won't they? So how do you feel about that when people bring their own food and drink in, because you are relying on them to buy products, right? Because ultimately that's how the business model works these days.
Yeah. So for us, our job is to make sure that the food and drink we have is the best possible quality, is delivered in the best possible way. And we will continue to innovate and do things that you can't necessarily get somewhere else. You can't get popcorn quite like our popcorn out of a bag in the supermarket. And that's an important part, and merch kind of adds to some of those pieces as well, of bringing that combination together. So
people will be more likely to buy your popcorn if it's served in a really cool bucket that is somehow linked to the film.
Wouldn't you? I think I think it is there. I think for me, that is a key part of it.
So Odeon itself has gone through a number of kind of ownership changes over the years, right? For people who don't know, it was obviously created here in the UK, which I think you can easily forget, given that now we have this kind of multiplex kind of structure. But there is a question about ownership structures in the industry. So cinemas have often been owned by private equity, which has this, it has this reputation of perhaps carrying significant debt loads, loading businesses up with debt and not always investing in them. How do you think this model has affected how cinemas invest and perform over the long term?
So I think, look, we've had the opportunity, we've opened 3 cinemas in the last year. We've invested in those and seen some great results. It will always be about how you continue to invest in making sure that you've got the cinema that people want to visit. But that, will always come with challenge too. So.
Yeah. And it's not always the case across the board, right? Because where you're investing in these kind of luxe cinemas, there are competitors of yours that have decided that that's not the end of the market that they're going for, right? So they're not investing so much and they're going for cheaper seats, perhaps at a less nice cinema to be a part of.
Yeah, I think there are many different models within the cinema industry in terms of how you invite guests in, and we've seen great things kind of come from our luxe. So we've been investing in that since 2018.
So paint a bit of a picture of us of luxe. Is that, can you have food and drink to your seat?
So not delivered to your seat, but the range that we offer is bigger. So you can have hot food, as well as kind of popcorn, all of the things that people would know and associate with cinema, through to a recliner seat. We have a bar within that as well. So you have the opportunity to kind of visit Oscar's bar.
Oscar's, which is named after?
Odeon.
Yeah.
And Oscar Deutsch. So there are lots of different elements within it that is just about elevating that piece that actually for some will extend that time within the cinema. It's not just the film, it's everything that we put round that film as well.
And so how much, investment are you putting into these cinemas? How much do they cost to build?
Significant amounts. So yeah, significant amounts. And we will do that in terms of some of that also might just be reseating and making sure that we've got the best seats in there, as much as doing a kind of full kit out of a cinema.
And so we talked a little bit about kind of staff costs, but we haven't talked necessarily about the kind of staffing of cinemas. And so overall, kind of painting a picture of the cinema industry, how are you feeling? Are you feeling optimistic?
For me, feels like it's built up, and it is exciting. It feels like we've had a really good start, and there's opportunity. We've been able to grow our business, add more cinemas in, and add more kind of excitement into coming into cinema, hopefully. So I am excited about it. It has challenges to it. For us, the challenge is about how we continue to keep that experience the way that we want it to. How do we ensure that we're continuing to innovate and mitigate costs in the right way for everyone that comes to us?
And do you think it's less about growing the industry as a whole, as we talked about right at the very start, kind of growing box office sales and perhaps kind of making those sales work a bit harder, say with the things that we talked about, like merch? So it's now just facing the facts that is a slightly tougher, slightly smaller, but perhaps more perfectly formed industry.
I think there's still opportunity to grow. For me, that ability for people to maybe might be an additional visit. It might be that you're coming and you haven't been for a little while, and I think the breadth of slate will give that opportunity to people. So I think there's still more growth in there, but it may come from different spaces as well.
Susie Welch, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing more about you, about Odeon and the industry at large. So thank you for joining us on The Business today.
Thank you.